You can't be the real you while equally desiring other people's approval and acceptance. They're fundamentally opposed approaches. Because one, being you, is entirely informed by you. No one else can tell you how to be the real you, the most honest, true you. Approval and acceptance, and that can come in many forms, is determined by other people and each individual other person that you're dealing with. And that's not something you can account for or orient yourself around or drive action based off of, because every single person is different. And so it depends, like, what are you using as the guide? Are you using you as the guide, or are you using everyone else and every distinct other person as the guide? Because the only way to get approval and acceptance from the people you want approval and acceptance from is to understand what each of those people would approve and accept. And then to orient and kind of fit yourself into that inevitably betrays you to some degree, even if it's really small and marginal. And all of us, the thing that I hear probably the most often from everyone I talk to, from strangers to best friends to clients, is, I just want to be me. I just want to be able to be free to be me. And this often is in a work context or a business context, but sometimes it's familial and societal as well, because we're constantly getting signals from the time that we existed that we should be a certain way. Stop crying, stop acting up, stop asking questions, stop laughing, stop being so loud, stop running around, stop going there, don't go here. It starts so young. And then as we enter school, and any system really, right, from school systems to friend systems to family systems, and then moving on into work and professional systems and larger society, there are all these rules around both spoken and unspoken, written and unwritten, about how we should be. And when we don't act in accordance with those unspoken or spoken rules, there are consequences, right? So in school, it was all oriented around a certain kind of achievement, of grades. And if you didn't fit that mold and didn't do it in the way that they wanted you to do it, you were clearly taken out, whether it was to the principal's office, whether it was just called out in class, but you were basically shown to be different, right? We were kind of removed or othered in some way. And that only continues, so on and so forth, because the whole system is designed to create more people who will function a certain way so that society and companies and manufacturing and the supply chain and capitalism and all of it, but also, a civil society functions. And some of those rules we may choose to abide by because we think they are right, like not killing people. That is a rule we all choose to abide by, for the most part. Most of us do. But inherently, at the base level, I'm not talking about murdering people. I'm talking about acting a certain way that other people are like, oh, why did that person do that? We're so judgmental in this society. We're constantly judging people for how they look, how they present themselves, how they speak, what they say, how they do it, how they dress, so on and so forth. And in the non-consequential actions that we take, and what I mean by that is we're not hurting other people, we often start making these really minor adjustments, and it starts at home because we want love and support and approval and protection from whoever took care of us, who raised us, to make sure that we're safe and we stay alive. And we start adjusting, conforming, and just doing it in little ways to the point where so many of us hide more and more and more of ourselves, where we feel like, oh, there's only certain settings or certain people with whom we can actually be our real, honest selves or speak our real mind. And so if we are oriented around approval and acceptance, and granted for each of us, that can turn into very different behaviors. And so for you, I would think about how do you act when you are leaning into wanting approval and acceptance? But considering those behaviors, they have kind of an insidious way of over time making us feel less and less safe to be ourselves, no matter who we're with. And because we get signals of either disapproval, other people disliking us, or even a sense that we're being judged, or that it rubs someone the wrong way, and if you were not hurting someone, you didn't disrespect someone, and it was solely a product of you just being you, and other people giving you a signal that they didn't like you being you, then most of us will shift, and most of us will hide or mask or edit ourselves, or even full-on change, because it's easier in society amongst other people, because we want to feel like we belong. We don't want to be ostracized, and we want to be with our friends and seemingly people who care about us. That will make the adjustments because it makes being out in the world safer, more accepting, seemingly more friendly. And for a time that will work, right? Because we'll then get the approval and the acceptance. But inevitably at some point, whether it's just like a nagging voice in your head, whether it's a moment where you realize you can't be yourself with a lot of people, or when you find yourself enjoying time alone much more because you don't want to be in the company of others because you're avoiding certain things, that's when it starts to insidiously affect how we show up and how we present ourselves. And social media is incredibly powerful for constantly making us feel like we cannot be ourselves, that it's not enough for us to be ourselves, that we need to be different, we need to look different, we need to act different, we need to achieve and succeed differently. But in the end, what are we here to do if not live and be alive as our most honest self? And in a world that is so oriented around judgment and so oriented around shoulds and a certain image of how we need to be and act, it's becoming increasingly hard to do that. And there's going to be increasing pressure, or it signals that we receive that we somehow are not accepted or approved of. But going back to it, in the end, what are we here to do? If you're not here to live a life that feels alive to you, that makes you feel the most fulfilled and to feel like you're living your most meaningful existence, if you're not here to do that, then okay, go for the approval and the acceptance. But if you're here to do that, the only way to do that is as you, not as some other version of you that's been manicured or created or edited to fit all these other people who are no different than you, who also want to just be you, be them, or be themselves. And so it's wild to me that in a world where all of us, most of us, I would bet all of us just want to be able to be free to be ourselves. Yet, so many of us are conforming to the pressures to be different so that we can be liked and accepted and approved of. And it feels quite sad because none of us are actually here doing the thing we're all meant to be here to do, which is live this very singular, unique existence that is coming from this brain and this heart and this body to experience the world in a way that only we can, but also to bring joy and care and love to others in ways that only we can, and contribute and have an impact and help in the only ways that we can. And so, yes, it is a daunting task, and yes, it requires bravery to be disliked and not accepted and not be approved of. But if we shy away from that, we're only creating more suffering within ourselves, which inevitably translates outward into suffering for the people around us, because we're not whole, and because we're not free, and because we are hiding and editing, and in that hiding and editing there's fear and there's insecurity. And inevitably, those things come out in unconscious ways, or sometimes conscious ways, that affect other people. Because if we're hurting, that hurt translates outward in some way at some point in time. And so there's a fearlessness that we can build towards to be ourselves, to be free, to be ourselves. But that only happens if we're willing to risk the consequences of not getting approval and not being accepted. And that is hard because that triggers a very core survival need. Because feeling like we are not accepted in a very primitive sense was directly connected to our ability to survive, because humans, for the most part, survived in groups. And so your acceptance in a group, your belonging in that group, was entirely connected to your ability to survive. Our modern world doesn't quite require that level of dependency on a group dynamic to hunt together and gather berries together anymore. But that feeling is still there. But the sooner we can move past that feeling, because our survival is actually no longer dependent on that feeling, we can separate ourselves from that feeling. And it doesn't feel good to not be accepted. It doesn't feel good to not be approved of. But the question just comes down to, are you okay not living as your most honest self and existing and sharing your most honest self, no matter who approves? Or would you rather edit and cut parts of yourself off and hide so that you don't deal with the discomfort of other people potentially not approving of you, or not liking you, or not accepting you? And if the answer, there's no judgment around what the answer to that question is, it's solely just what's more honest to you. And can you be honest with yourself about what you really desire? Because I generally have a hard time believing that people don't want to be themselves. But I can believe that the pain of being that can feel overwhelming to the point where we would choose to not be that, or how so many of us end up choosing not to be here anymore because it's so painful. So I don't discount how painful it can be, or challenging it can be. But in the end, the question still is, like, what are you here to do? What life are you here to live? What person are you here to be? And if that is one who wants the acceptance and approval of others, and that truly brings you joy, and you don't mind the editing of yourself, then great. That's a wonderful thing to know. But if you do find that you want to feel your most alive as your most real, honest self, then unfortunately, the hard work has to go through accepting that we may not be accepted, and starting to get comfortable with not being approved of and not being liked. Because everybody has their reasons for whatever it may be. It doesn't have to make sense to you. But in the end, no matter how other people act, there's at minimum a very solid trust and love and acceptance of ourselves, so that we know we're living as honestly and truly as we can be.